just because we're getting record prices, we got to remember that we probably have record input costs as well. So we've got to do everything that we can do to maximize the profit every year.
Today, we're going to look at some very basic management practices that data shows will increase the value of your calves when you go to market them. Now, the values that we're talking about have been derived from data through a partnership between Superior Livestock, Kansas State University, and Merck Animal Health. So today, Dr. Chris Thompson with Merck joins us as he walks us through that data, from breeding management to calfhood management that also includes looking at, is there a return on investment for preconditioning? What about weaning? And what about what doesn't affect the value?
Things that we found over the years that do not affect sale prices. 4 big things.
Tune in to find out what those 4 things are and what actually pays a net premium on your calves on this edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And this is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Glad to have you joining us on the program here today. Yeah, as you heard there in the opening, a topic that I think, well, I hope it spurs everybody's interest when we start talking about how we can add value to these calves. And when I say value, I'm not talking about just gross dollars. I'm talking about a net return is what we're going to be looking at here today. A very practical conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. Now, something else I wanted to mention too, as I think about today's show and in the previous 2 shows that we've had, really down that vein of just very practical, useful information no matter where you're at in the world in regards to physicality of your size and scope of operation. But last episode, we talked with Don Nato about taking the mystique out of low-stress stockmanship. A great show there. And in the episode ahead of that, Dr. Alan Williams joined us as we talked about tips for successful summer grazing. If you missed them, you can go to our podcast site at workingranchradio.com. You can download them there, or if you have your own podcast provider, you can do it there as well. Hey, wanted to also mention coming up later in the show, Ted Perry with Purina will be joining us. We're going to be talking about the importance of water in the diet of a cow. You know, we always talk about everything but water, and I think you're going to find the topic here today, again, very, very practical. And of course, meteorologist Don Day will be in later with a look at our long-term weather. Now, for those of you that are regular subscribers to Working Ranch Magazine, I'm sure you've had the opportunity to peruse and read through your latest summer issue of the magazine. But for those of you that are not subscribers, you can start today by going to workingranchmag.com, or you can also stop by your local tractor supply store and pick one up right off the shelf. And a shout out here today to the Tractor Supply Store in Geneva, New York, and in Albion, Michigan. I think I said that right. I hope I did. Toledo, Ohio, and in Williston, North Dakota. And finally here today, before we jump into our conversation, next week's program, I want to highlight that real quick. We're going to be talking about the importance of the sovereignty and the security of a country that is able to produce its own food and fiber. And I've invited Amanda Radke to join us on the program. Now, she's also has a podcast entitled The Heart of Rural America, but she's also a speaker, an author, and educator. Her and her husband, Tyler, ranch near Mitchell, South Dakota. She's a 5th-generation cattle rancher, has been an advocate in the industry for many, many years, very educated and knowledgeable as we dive into this subject, and I think you're going to enjoy that conversation, so be sure to tune in on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, let's jump into our subject here today. Joining us here on the program is Dr. Chris Thompson, Technical Services Veterinarian for Merck Animal Health. And Dr. Thompson, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thanks for having me.
As we look at just how can we add value to these calves, there's multiple ways that we can do that. And I think to start off with first, as I had told you off air, I think sometimes when we're looking at record markets that we're at here today, in fact, as I was telling you, I was looking on Superior's results just to look, and I know we got some big video sales coming up here throughout the summer. This market is as high as we have ever seen it in our industry. And I think as ranchers, sometimes it's easy to be kind of complacent and just take, well, we'll just take what we get because it's already better than we've ever had before. If we take that approach, we're going to still be leaving dollars on the table.
Absolutely we are. And, just because we're getting record prices, we got to remember that we probably have record input costs as well. So we've got to do everything that we can do to maximize the profit every year because we're not going to have record prices forever. it'll probably sort itself out at some point in the future. So, and with input costs as high as they are and replacement costs, we really need to be maximizing profit off of every cow that we're running.
Mm-hmm. Today, as we dive into the whole aspect of adding value to these calves, we're going to get into, what actually pays a premium. What is it worth for us? And we're going to look into that. I first want you to go back and talk a little bit about some of the numbers that our conversation is going to be based off here today. It's a study that you have done in conjunction with Superior Livestock as well as Kansas State University. But talk a little bit about that so we can sort of set the precedence here and a foundation for what we're going to be talking about here today.
Yeah, so for the past 10 or 12 years, we've worked in conjunction with both Superior Livestock and Kansas State University to get that year-end data from Superior on all of their sales and then have it analyzed at Kansas State University. And then we can pick out trends from year to year as far as, how calves are selling, what factors are impacting the price of the calves that are being sold. And, the data that we'll cover today is based on all of the sales in 2024. So like last year, there was just over 850,000 head of cattle sold through Superior Livestock. The mean weight of those calves was 572 pounds. The lot sizes were 118 head per lot. And at the end of the day, the average national price was $294 per pound based on the 2024 sales data.
Okay, so I think one of the things that was interesting in the conversation that we had just briefly as we were talking about the overall arching theme here today is what actually pays a premium. And I think as ranchers, we're inundated so much with different companies or different entities out there that say, if you do this, you're going to get this much in return. But I think really in the context of our conversation today, it really is about the net at the end of the day, don't you think?
Absolutely it is. And the nice thing is when we analyze this data, everything we look at, we compare it to a base, but everything is evaluated individually. So everything that you're going to hear me say, you can use it as in an additive fashion. So if there's a premium for having steer calves, you can add that to a premium for having uniform lots or having progressive genetics claims. Everything is totally separated, so everything can be additive on the numbers that I'm going to share.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's start down some of these roads of the different things. And for me, I guess I was kind of surprised in some ways of some of the things that I saw that maybe people aren't doing, but I realized, different parts of the country do things maybe a little bit differently. But one of the things you just touched on there, and I want to jump into that a little bit, is the aspect of steer calf value versus a heifer calf value and taking that all into context and then making some management decisions. I'll have you expand on that a little bit further.
Yeah, so based on the 2024 calf sale prices, steers brought $29.60 per hundred more than heifers did. So almost $30 a hundred. Take that times 5, you're $150 plus more on a steer versus a heifer. So I think, as a rancher, you need to look at, what is your end goal? Are you raising your own replacements, or are you simply selling everything? And if you're selling everything or selling most everything, are you using anything like artificial insemination? If you are, maybe looking at using sexed semen would be something that would help you, because you're going to end up selling more steers at the end of the day, which is going to pay big dividends at the end of the year.
Chris, I think too, when you start talking about AIing and all of that, put into context just maybe how you work through that versus a bull breed and justifying that and everything.
Yeah, AI's got a lot of advantages. Probably one of the biggest things is uniformity and getting more cattle bred during that first cycle. And we all know the older a calf is, the more it's going to weigh come weaning time. So the more calves we can get in that first cycle, we're going to have more pounds to sell at the end of the year. You can do synchronization and just use bulls, but if we're wanting a higher percentage of steers, we can synchronize and use some sex semen and end up with more steer calves to sell at the end of the year. There's been a lot of numbers run over the years and comparing AI into bull breeding, and it really comes out basically a wash. If you can cut your bull numbers a little bit and lean a little more heavily on AI, your cost per pregnancy really comes out pretty similar at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break here, Dr. Thompson. When we come back, I want to continue on. There's some other aspects that we need to look at. Again, the overarching theme here is, what actually pays a premium? What is it worth us as ranchers to be really considering and looking at, not just jumping on every bandwagon that comes down through the mail or through your emails of looking at that, but what actually pays in the marketplace? That's kind of what we're looking at here today. We'll take a break and we'll get into more of that when we come back. This segment today brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influence females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. This year, make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics.
When it comes to building fence, driving those steel posts can be exhausting and absolutely backbreaking. But there is another way you could be doing this. Now, I'm not talking about those bulky and expensive gas-powered or hydraulic pounders. What I'm talking about is the Man Saver Post Driver. Yeah, it's called the Man Saver Post Driver by Roar Manufacturing. This is a portable, lightweight, easy-to-use post driver that runs off of any small air compressor and is 100% made in the USA. The Man Saver Post Driver comes in a variety of models, from driving posts ranging from vineyard stakes to T-posts and all the way up to 3.5-inch diameter posts. While it may be called the Man Saver Post Driver, shoot, I've heard some go as far as calling it the Marriage Saver Post Driver. But take a look for yourself. See it in action when you go to their website at roarmfg.com. That's ROHRERMFG.com. Or if you want to talk to a real person, give them a call at 800-980-7599. The Man Saver Post Driver, the portable, lightweight, and easy-to-use pneumatic post driver where the name speaks for itself. As we continue on looking here today at the things that we as ranchers could be considering and actually what pays a premium in this time in our market where we're seeing record high prices, not being complacent with that and just taking what we get, but also maybe exploiting some continued options. And again, it's not about what you can spend, it's about what's at net, what'll actually pay. Dr. Chris Thompson is my guest here today with Merck Animal Health. He's one of their technical services veterinarian. I want to look some other things too. And this was interesting to me. I think we all understand. I know when we sell calves, whether we're selling them through the sale barn or whether we're selling cattle through a video or an internet site, whatever that might be, uniformity, that's something we sometimes overlook. And there's lots of different aspects of uniformity. Maybe it's, even the age of the calves down to whether they got horns, whether they're medium size or medium to large or smalls. But talk a little bit about the uniformity that you see in the records and the numbers out of the research.
Yeah, when we look at these prices, if we look strictly at weight, just having an even lot of cattle is another $5-6 a head. Your flesh can play a role. If buyers seem to prefer a light to medium flesh, and that's worth $10 to $14 per head, just having that light to medium flesh calf. Frame size, again, a medium or medium large frame is what the buyers tend to prefer, and it's worth $22 a head. So a lot of those little things, that it starts with your breeding decisions and how those calves look when they're being sold. That's what's important to these buyers.
One of the things I noticed with this, and it's even some of the other things we're going to talk about or have talked about, but specifically in this category of conversation here, is the fact that this isn't really something that as a rancher is going to cost you much to implement. That's kind of what I feel on this.
It's exactly right. These are just the way you market these cattle, what they look like when they're getting videoed or what they look like when they're going through the sale ring. That's what the buyers want. They want something that they can put on feed and they are just going to take off. They got to have the frame size to do it. You don't want big butterball calves going through there. They want something that's a little leaner and then that's ready to go add a bunch of pounds once they put the feed to it.
Mm-hmm. The uniformity in lots is going to then take us to another direction, a bit what we just talked about with some of the breeding in that, but that is even getting the cycle on these cows tightened up and ways that can be done on that. getting these calves all aged. I mean, a calf that's 20 to 30 days older than the other calves is just going to weigh more. And getting that cycle, those cow herds tightened up, that's going to make a lot of difference in the uniformity.
Absolutely it is. And there's easy way to do it, whether you're doing any artificial insemination or anything like that, or just using all bulls. There are ways that you can turn a bull in on day 0, come back 5 days later, give every cow a prostaglandin. It's going to sync everything up. It's not going to affect anything that got covered in those first 5 days. And you're going to get more of those cows pregnant in the first cycle. And that's just going to add way more pounds when you go to sell in the fall.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And the technique on that, I hadn't really heard just how to do that, but that covers, because I think the concern I had with the prostaglandin shot was knocking something out that was within that 10-day window. But if you've already had the bulls out for 5 days, you've covered most of those, and then you're getting everybody that hasn't been cycled yet.
Yeah. So basically a prostaglandin only works when there's a mature corpus luteum on an ovary, and that's not going to be mature in that first 5 days. So you can breed cows for 5 days, give everybody a prostaglandin, and it's not going to affect the ones that just cycled. But anybody that hasn't, if they've got a mature CL, it's going to knock that off and hopefully bring everybody into heat and let those bulls go to work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's head now into another category. And this is something I've had other conversations with some other guests on. And that's really, as ranchers, really evaluating the programs that are out there. And boy, I mean, it's a list that's as long as the day is, as far as programs that you could be involved in out there. And I'm not talking negatively about them. They were put in for a purpose. Then there's been some value. People have seen some value in those. But as ranchers, we do need to evaluate those programs that are out there versus not doing those. And some of that's going to be more on natural and GAP certified and that kind of a thing, not as much as about some other programs. But let's head into that conversation a bit.
Yeah. Before I jump into that, I'm going to go through a couple things that we found over the years that do not affect sale prices. 4 big things. The implant status of a calf does not affect sale price. For a while, there was a big push to test everything for BVD, being persistently infected for BVD. That's not paying anymore. The Natural Plus program is not paying anymore. And then Bang's vaccination of heifers is not affecting sale price anymore. When we get into some of those other program things like you were talking about, so last year GAP is a big program, Global Animal Partnership that people can enroll in. There's audits that have to occur and some enrollment paperwork that has to be done. But, in the superior data from last year, that being enrolled in the GAP program paid about $18 a head. So there's definitely a place for that. There is a premium for that. And if that's the route you go, that's the kind of premium that we saw last year. Probably a bigger program that's out there is the NHTC, or the non-hormone treated cattle. And, there's a place for that. There's a market for that. We need some cattle that are NHTC because the end consumers want that. There are a group of consumers that want NHTC cattle. The numbers we saw last year showed that being NHTC and having all the paperwork in place paid about $20 a head on those calves.
Mm-hmm. Back to those really quick, and you talked about GAP and NHTC. The premium that you're seeing there, and I've never done either one of those. I know some folks that have done it and folks that have continued to do it. So if they're continuing to do it, I'm guessing it's working for them. But I mean, what's your thoughts, the value of that? And I'm not going to pitch you up against those programs necessarily, because as you said, there's buyers or consumers out there that want that type of product. But based upon those premiums, it sounds to me like what you're saying is you really need to evaluate that.
You do. And I mean, there's definitely a place for it. They are good programs. There are, consumers that demand those, and we need to fill that. We need to fill everybody with beef at the end of the day. And there's a lot of different channels to do it. And these are, 2 channels that are definitely needed. The thing about these programs is you have to be enrolled ahead of time. You've got to do the paperwork. I know there's some audits involved in some of them. Probably some tagging requirements as far as age and source verification with GAP and things like that. I think it's just good for everybody to evaluate. If this works well for your ranch, great. Then you should definitely pursue it. If there's other things that would maybe pay you better, you need to look at those as well.
Mm-hmm. So I think the other side of that conversation then that comes up is implanting. Then potentially, if you're not going to be in those types of programs, look at that implanting, because if you're not going to jump in a natural deal, if you're not going to sell your calves as all natural and whatever the certification process that goes in there, you really are leaving some pounds on the table, which pounds at last what I saw was looking at about $4 a pound. I just conservatively say 15 pounds. I don't know. That's probably being pretty conservative, but that's awful lot of money.
So looking at last year's data, roughly 40% of the calves were not in a program that banned implants. So they weren't GAP, they weren't NHTC, but yet they weren't implanted either. So your typical nursing calf implant is going to return roughly 23 pounds. All the data over all the calf foot implants over the years, we're talking roughly 23 pounds. So, this data set, the national average price was $294. So 23 pounds times $294 was $66 of lost opportunity last year by not implanting. If we look at what the prices we're looking at now, and we take that same 23 pounds and it's now $4, we're over $80 a head that we could gain just by putting an implant in at branding.
Yeah. And about 5 years ago, that was our profit.
Exactly.
Outrunning the whole herd.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a big opportunity there. An implant's going to cost you a couple bucks a head. And if it's going to pay back 80, that's pretty darn good return on investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So regarding the implant deal real quick, I mean, there's probably a couple times you could do that. That is, doing it at branding time or at preconditioning.
Yep. And honestly, I think the best opportunity is at branding. The work that's been shown is if you give one implant at branding, whether it's a steer or even a heifer, you're not going to affect any future reproduction wise on those heifers. Now, if you're going to keep them for a replacement, there's probably no need to implant them. You don't need to grow them any bigger right away. But if you're selling heifers, absolutely implant all the steers and heifers at branding. If that's the route you want to go, I think branding's the time to do it.
All right. Let's take another break here. When we come back, I want to get into now the conversation of preconditioning, because I think that's where we're headed down as we look at the lifespan of this, where the breeding side of things can come into uniformity, selling, marketing calves programs versus not being in some of these programs. Now let's get into preconditioning, which is going to be later on in that summer time frame, fall time frame, depending on when folks calve. We'll get to that next. This segment today brought to you by Rio Max, the tub that pays for itself.
We've done a few manure studies on the Rio Max product. On average, we're seeing 51% less undigested feed in cows' manure that have been on Rio Max. She's digesting her feed that much better and getting that much more protein and that much more energy out of her feed stock.
Generally figure about 5.5 to 6 acres a pair. Through the drought of 2020, we did 4.5 acres a pair on ours. Still had adequate grass left.
I guess they utilize more of what they eat, so they eat less.
We were actually able to increase the number of cattle that we were running probably by 30% with the same amount of grass.
We had a worse drought this year, worse heat this year. Weaned them a whole month earlier. They weighed at least 100 to 150 pounds more this year, and my cows had pones on them. The only thing different is the Rio Max tub.
Rio Max, the tub that pays for itself.
To learn more, call 888-386-0699 or online at riomax.net. Okay, Dr. Thompson, now let's get into the phase of the life cycle of this calf as we're trying to look at ways of how we can add value to these calves at auction. Of course, weaning, we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's talk about just literally the preconditioning element of this. And I realize as I say this, I'm going to have you explain it pretty basic here to get started with, and I know there's a lot of people that understand and know what I'm talking about with preconditioning, but just in case, I just want to cover that base. Preconditioning, what it entails when we talk about that.
Yeah, so if we look at all the different VAC programs out there, I mean, if you're going to sell your calves, whether through the sale barn or through a video auction or whatever, there's going to be different vaccination programs that you can enroll in. Most basic one is you're going to vaccinate your calves one time. Typically, it's going to be branding time, and you're going to give them, a clostridial vaccine, a modified live 5-way viral, and then probably a Mannheimia and or Pasteurella bacterial vaccine, and it's a one-time deal. And when we get into the numbers, that's going to be the base. So any premiums are earned when you get above and beyond that. And I think probably the most common way calves are sold is getting 2 rounds of shots. So that first one at branding time, and then another one, pre-weaning or preconditioning. So we're just getting a second dose of that Clostridial vaccine in them, another modified live 5-way viral vaccine, another dose of Mannheimia and or Pasteurella vaccine in them. Ideally, that's getting done, 3 to 4 weeks before we wean those calves and sell them.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick question here. Any numbers and I don't know that this stuff had that, but a third round. Have you seen anything on that? We have never done a third one. Like, for example, if we wean calves, for a long wean, we've usually only done, I think, like a 45-day wean. So, yep. But if you were going to wean calves, like a 60-day wean, have you seen any numbers, the value of that third round of those shots?
Not really, because when we get into the weaning programs, they still only require 2 rounds of vaccines. The timing can be a little bit different on them because they can be a little bit older when we give those vaccines. There's a Vac Precon, which is a program made for people that are buying calves and then just kind of backgrounding them for at least 60 days. So that's going to be a situation where you're probably going to vaccinate them on arrival. You're going to come back, 2-3 weeks later, give them another round of shots, and you'll own them for a total of 60 days. Those aren't your typical home-raised ranch calves that we're selling. But, even at the weaning programs, whether it's a 45 or 60 day, the programs only require 2 doses of vaccines.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit on these, on the vac programs, the weaning and all of that together, what you're finding in the results that you saw out of the study.
So if we look at a VAC 34 program, which is going to be our 2 rounds of shots sold right at weaning, right off the cow, we're looking at about $15 per head premium versus just having those calves vaccinated one time. And I would say this is by far and away the most common program that people will sell in. But, for a $5 investment, it pays back $15, which is still a pretty good return. And it's going to really help those calves from a health standpoint once they get to their next stop in life. Once we jump up from there, we jump into weaning programs. And I know not everybody can wean calves. In an ideal world for the health of the animals, we would probably wean everything for 45 to 60 days before we send it down the road, but that's just not practical everywhere. Mm-hmm. But if we look at, a VAC 45 type of program with our 2 rounds of vaccines and weaning for 45 days, that turns into $50 a head when we go to sell those calves. So there's definitely some money to be made when we do that.
I was kind of surprised looking at these numbers on the VAC 60s. There's a return there. It's almost a $30 return on that. But that difference between 45 and 60 is not quite there.
No,
not. Other than you're going to make up maybe in pounds that you just got them that much longer. But then that depends again too.
Yeah. The premium for VAC 60 compared to VAC 45, it's about $20 less. And there's definitely way less calves that go through the VAC 60. Most people won't hold those calves more than 45 days. And I think that kind of skews that number down because there's not very many in that group. So I'm not really sure why that discrepancy is there, other than it's probably just a factor of the number of lots that are VAC 45 versus VAC 60.
Yeah. So my question would come this, and this is from experience. And when I look at the VAC 34, which is basically giving the shots, selling right off the cow, as you said, versus a VAC 45, which is giving the shots, but holding them out 45 days. And that's a difference of, what'd you say, $35 difference net or difference between those two. So about a $50 on the VAC 45, $15 on the VAC 34. You got to figure in some death loss in that cost too, don't you?
You do. You've got to figure some treatment and potentially some death loss in there, and you got to figure your cost to feed and what you think those calves will actually gain in that time frame. There is a calculator available that K-State has helped build, agmanager.info. There's a calculator that people can use and put their own inputs into and see what's going to work for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, And I think that's something to really, really think about through some of that. And I know for the guys down the road that are buying these calves, they really do like the VAC 45s, which is why the premium is there, really. Yeah. They really like that. That's some surety in that. I think, too, as we're talking about this, weaning calves versus not weaning calves, I think our program last week where we had Don Nato on, as we were talking about low stress cattle stockmanship and some things that you can do there on weaning might help mitigate some of that death loss. I feel that's one of the mechanisms to go into that. But regardless of that, I think when we come to the whole aspect of our conversation here today, is there anything that we left out, some other things that you're seeing that we didn't cover yet?
I think we've covered most of it. I think I would just encourage everybody to really look hard at the marketing of their cattle. I mean, this is how you make your living. You need to actively market your cattle and do everything that you can to increase your revenue from every calf that you sell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point, because it's just been pretty easy to just, whether we load up in the trailer and go to the sale barn like we've been doing it for the last 25 years, or look at some options. Well, I tell you, and even the sale barns, they really adapted to some different methods of selling calves. Not always do you got to bring them right to their place, but the internet and the web, and of course, years ago, the video auctions that were big and still going on here today, that's really revolutionized the ability to sell right off the place too. And I think there's some value to sell off the place, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of value to selling right off the place. And, it's interesting, we didn't cover it, but when we looked at the superior data, the cattle that were marketed on the country page actually had a higher sale price than those that went through the video sale or the private treaty. And it was
really,
$3 a hundred, so $15 a head if they were listed on the country page, versus a base of the video sale, and private treaties were actually below the video sale. So again, I encourage people to look at that calculator and really put the numbers to it for your own operations.
You bet. Well, Dr. Thompson, good to have you here on the program. I know you kind of talked about there at the very end, just put your numbers together. And I think that's probably the thing I come back to on a lot of this, is that if we look through all of our conversation here today, it's a matter of just getting it out, whether it's on a spreadsheet, whether it's on the dining room table napkin or a piece of tablet paper, whatever. But you really do, at the end of this, to understand where you should go and what you should or could be looking at, is you really do need to know the numbers, don't you?
You do. I mean, a ranch has got to be a for-profit operation to continue on into the future. So you've really got to crunch those numbers and make sure that you're doing everything you can to maximize your profitability.
You bet. Well, thanks again for being here on the program. I thought the conversation is extremely practical, and in light of where we're at, there's still things that folks can do this year. We're not behind the gun with anything we've done. Definitely maybe some breeding decisions that you've already done or haven't done yet, you can still do. But as far as some of the preconditioning stuff that we talked about, that stuff we can do still, can't we?
Absolutely. I mean, we can still look at those fall shots and make sure we're getting order there. We may have some guys that haven't branded yet, and, throwing an implant in there. If you haven't done it before or have gone away from it, it's a great opportunity right now. If you're not in one of those programs that says you can implant, throw it in there.
You bet. All right. Well, Dr. Thompson, good to have you here again. Like I said before, great conversation. Thanks for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.
You bet. Again, Dr. Chris Thompson, Technical Services Veterinarian for Merck Animal Health, joining us here today on the program in what I would call an extremely practical conversation as we look at ways that we can add value to these calves. And one of the things that I really like about this is with the data that Dr. Thompson shared with us is that it's real. It's the stuff that they along Merck Animal Health, along with Superior Livestock and Kansas State University, putting together to really draw out and what is working, where are producers seeing the return on their investments. And really, at the end of the day, as ranchers, as business people, that is something that we really have to know when we're making these business and management decisions. And speaking of management decisions, something that oftentimes gets overlooked, and that is the quality of our water to our animals. Well, we're going to talk about that coming up next. This segment today brought to you by K-Line Irrigation, a cost-effective adaptive irrigation solution designed specifically with the grass-based livestock producer in mind.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
And joining us now on the Working Ranch Radio Show is Ted Perry, Director of Technical Services with Purina. Good to have you back, Ted. Always look forward to visiting with you.
Hi, Justin. It's good to be back.
Well, our topic here today as we look at this, and it's, frankly, Ted, I don't know that this is a topic that I hear a lot of conversation on, and that is about just water and the importance of good quality water for these cattle. We talk about everything else in the world, whether it's markets, we're always talking animal nutrition, which this is going to be tie into that a little bit, but we very seldom have conversations about water.
Yeah, and water is kind of taken for granted, but if you think about it as a feed nutritionist, I hate to admit it, but water is actually more important than feed. Cattle can go without feed for 7 to 10 days. 2 to 3 days without water, you got dead cattle. So, it is absolutely essential. We're starting to heat up, get into the hot part of the summer. And one of the things that if the listeners take anything into consideration, it's as it gets hotter, the cattle need more water, and it's not linear. So at 50 degrees, cattle get along fine with cows get along fine with 8 to 10 gallons of water. But as we move up to 90 degrees, now we're up to 20, and as we get 100 degrees, now we're up to like 30 gallons of water those cattle need. 30 gallons of water is a lot. I look at it in simple terms. That's 6 5-gallon buckets per cow that we're getting. So if they're drinking out of a stream and we get in the summer, those can go down pretty quick. If we're looking at ponds, we have to check the water. Not only the water, we'll get to water quality in a minute, but we need to make sure there's adequate water in there, because one of the things that happens when the cow doesn't get enough water, because water obviously is hydration is important, and that fuels her whole metabolism. But as water intake decreases, so does dry matter intake, because water is essential for mixing in the rumen. And we've, on your podcast, we've talked several times about the importance of the rumen intake. But as that feed intake goes down, so does the calories she's eating. So body condition score is going to drop. And then because they're not getting less nutrition, then if I look in terms of a cow-calf operation, the milk production is taking a double whammy, because one of the most abundant components of milk is water. Mm-hmm. And if she's got less nutrients, she's producing less milk. So she has less milk from less water. So now our calf is really suffering, but the calf also is dehydrated. Mom's dehydrated, the calf's dehydrated. It just sets up a really nasty situation, and it can be as simple as just not having enough water that the animals aren't producing to their full capability. And if we look at, we've talked earlier, the genetics of the cow herd today are phenomenal as the total pounds they can produce, but we've got to give them everything. And we've talked several times on nutrition, what all we have to give them. Water is absolutely essential to make everything else work.
Mm-hmm. I think you had mentioned it a bit ago, and we often, I should say, take water for granted. And I think we also, for those folks that are have seen an abundance amount of rain this year, you really start to take it for granted. And then when you get in a drier situation, and we have folks across the country that are seeing some drier conditions, you realize where you're deficient in your water capability of getting good clean water to your animals. And I was on the phone with my brother this morning. He'd went out to the pasture. Now we've had pretty good moisture up here, and he had a couple cows that were dead in the pasture, one blind and acting. So we're starting to go through the process. Okay, what's causing it? Is it plants or is it water? Which gets us to the point of when we get to that time, it's pretty important to be testing water as well.
Yep. Well, as we get dry, it doesn't take very long with going out water, because a lot of the springs and stuff, as it dries out, the water quality can change, because there's certain amount of sulfates, there's certain amount of iron in the water. So if that spring's flowing at 80 gallons per minute, there's a certain amount of iron. As it gets drier, and we know that the springs will start slowing out. Now all of a sudden, when we're at 30 gallons of water a minute, now we've got a higher percentage of iron coming in the water, because it's coming through, it's dissolving at the same rate. So our water quality is changing. And as we get things, so there's a couple of things that we need to look at and you can test water. It's not a bad idea to do water samples. The big thing that we're looking for is, some total dissolved solids, which basically are how many minerals are in the water. You can actually get, as water dries out, you can get higher iron. When we get higher iron, the biggest effect on that is it starts tying up, and same way with sulfates, is they start tying up other trace minerals. So, my zinc and copper is fine, but then when the iron goes up in the water, now that iron in the rumen is tying up the copper, so it's not getting the cows anymore. So it's not a bad idea to test for total solids and see what's going on with that. And then we have a really nice solution, and some of this has been around a while. Remember when we didn't have a lot of organic traces around, because that's the solution for it. If you've got high iron that's binding up the copper, then if you give it a copper source that's already bound to amino acids, then the iron can't get to it. Or same way with the sulfates. So, it's like everything else. When the water quality starts to decline, you need to really up your game on your mineral program to make sure she's getting all she needs. But still, the number one thing we're looking at with water is just total amount of water that the cows have available to them. Make sure they've got plenty of high quality water.
Just a couple quick things here, Ted, and I want to get back to the solution on this in just a bit. But real quick, for folks that do have, your water supplies that are out there, we've got various things for everything from reservoirs to, of course, drainages that have moving water, kind of a little bit different situation there. I'm talking about more of the water sources where water's captive, whether it's in a reservoir, it's a dam, or any stock tank. And this is something I've not been really good about is cleaning those stock tanks.
Yep. And there's two things with stock tanks. And this was just a month or so ago. I was out in California and it was pointed out and I forget about it. I actually took a picture of it to remind me. They're in a dry situation. So they're putting out, and like the ponds and reservoirs are going down. So they put stock tanks out. Well, and the cows were doing fine. But the calves can't drink out of that stock tank. The calves were basically trying to bow their head over and try to drink out of that. Well, so basically what we've got is the calf's water supply is milk. So when I talk about in terms of, how much the cows need, the cows are going to need 30 gallons. 300-pound calf's he's going to need another 10 gallon of water. But if there's 1,000-gallon tank sitting there and he can't reach it, doesn't matter. You've got to make sure that got a shorter tank or somehow that make sure that those calves have access to it, which is the big thing. But that's one of the things to watch for is there total, and do you have is there a way to get water to those cows? Do you have a secondary source, whether it's hulling water? A lot of ranches, there's still windmills, they're still pumping water, but we need to watch those tanks, because you can start growing stuff in those tanks that doesn't really hurt the rumen environment's full of bugs, right? So when an animal drinks, but what happens is with a taste and you can actually start tying stuff up, but also just reduce the total amount of water that the cow will eat. And one of the biggest things, I'm sorry to say, that we see contaminate a lot of hair starts at contamination is fecal matter. And when you get a lot of fecal matter in there, all of a sudden you're fertilizing. So now we're going to grow more algae. We've got more nutrients to grow algae and stuff, and just lowers the overall quality of water. So cleaning the tanks out once in a while, and some of these cement tanks, they're tough to clean. I mean, you have to work at it, but once a year, it doesn't hurt to clean them out, and you'll be amazed at how much just sludge is in the bottom of them. Yeah. But cleaning that out, because that can just making higher quality water, or basically fresh water, can actually increase the amount she's going to drink. And the more she drinks, the more she's going to produce. So we want to maximize water intake. Sounds nuts. We're in a drought. We're conserving water every place else, but we really want those girls to drink as much water as they need. And we need to probably account for, cow-calf pair, late summer, they probably need 30 to 40 gallons of water per day. That's a lot of water to account for.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, as we kind of close this out, again, let's go back to the solution on this, because I think that's something. Number one is just good quality water and have it abundant for that cow and that calf. I mean, that was just first and foremost. But beyond that, a mineral program in there that can help to offset whatever can happen in that water situation.
Well, and what I'm a big fan of, if you haven't done a water test for a while, do a water test. The wells may have been fine a while ago, 5 years ago, we did a test and they were fine. It doesn't hurt to do another water test, test some of those samples, because especially where we've got some of those tanks that we haven't cleaned for a while, let's make sure we don't have a lot of organic matter, because one of the things that can happen with that buildup is you can get nitrates. And then we all know what happens. We measure nitrates in forages all the time, but if it's in the water supply, you can have the same problems. So, and nitrates can come from, like we just talked about, the fecal matter contamination, lots of different places. Not a bad idea to test the water samples. If we do go into a dry situation, again, we could have some nitrates from runoffs, things like that. So I guess if I'm looking for my big three, one is make sure I got total water. Two, I want to make sure I've got a good water quality test. And then when I take that water quality test, what are my solutions? And a lot of times the beauty of water quality tests, you run it, everything's fine. We can rest easy. We don't have to change anything. Depending on how that water test comes back, we may need to do some dilution. We may need to, the worst case scenario is I have to find another water supply. It could be as simple as if I've got high sulfates or high iron, things like that. I just change my mineral status a little bit to account for minerals tied up, and I'm good to go. But it starts with plenty of water and make sure I get a good water test and know what I'm dealing with. Don't just assume the water's good because it was good last year and we've ranched here for 100 years and the water's always been good. Not a bad, because cattle are really good at adjusting to poor quality water. And what happens is as they adjust to it, their productivity goes down. So right now, calf prices are great. Now's the time to spend the money. Let's make sure we're doing everything, because we may, right now we're okay. 3 or 4 years from now, we may need that 30, 40 pounds extra we get from calves just from water quality issues.
Yeah. All right, Ted. Well, if folks have some questions or want more resources about water quality and some things that can help with that along with the mineral program, how do they do that?
They can look at our website where there's a Ask the Expert section on PurinaMills.com.
Okay. All right. Well, Ted, always good to visit with you. I always like our little conversations here, in addition to the side conversations that we have both before and after that aren't here. Good to visit with you again.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. And again, that was Ted Perry, Director of Technical Services for Purina. Like he said, if you have questions about a solution, maybe you have a water quality problem, you're trying to find a good mineral package that goes with that, feel free to reach out to them. You can do that through their website at purina.com. There's the Ask the Experts tab that you can go into there. You can visit with Ted or some of the other very highly trained technical services folks there at Purina. Check it out at purina.com. We'll be back with a look at our long-term weather after this.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the WeatherStationExperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit MeasureRain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to MeasureRain.com.
And joining us now with a look at our long-term weather is meteorologist Don Day. And Don will start it out by this way and say the Canadians got it right. and it goes back to one of your podcasts last week as you were starting to unfold the weather that we're seeing as we look ahead into this 4th of July weekend ahead of us, and seeing that the summer monsoon a little bit earlier, a few weeks earlier. And this was something the Canadian model had pegged clear back in March.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're referring to the long range models, like the seasonal forecast that forecast months at a time. And we look at the European model, the Canadian model, and the American models. And one thing that was showing up this winter, the Canadian was advertising that it was going to be an early and robust monsoon season in the southwestern United States, which ends up impacting other parts of the country as that natural flow of subtropical moisture coming up out of Mexico and Central America comes into the United States. Now, some years are better than others. Last year was a very weak year, and that's why a lot of the southwestern United States is under severe and extreme drought right now. But it's really interesting. The Canadians, you would think, would be really good at the cold part of the weather, and it is, but it actually was the model that picked up the tropics and the lower latitudes the best. And so we have to, do a hat tip to the Canadian model. And the end result is we've already seen this. Over the last week, We've seen some very heavy rain. We've had 2 big flash floods in New Mexico, in Roswell area, Ruidoso, New Mexico, those southern counties in New Mexico, and even up 1 to 2, 3 inches of rain around Albuquerque. And we saw some of that tropical moisture get all the way up in Nebraska. Grand Island, Nebraska, late last week, picked up 7 to 10 inches of rain in less than 36 hours. And you can trace that moisture all the way back to Mexico. So it's an important facet to how the summer goes. And the good news is, for the drought areas of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and even maybe some of the desert areas of California, up into the Great Basin states of Nevada and Utah, this bodes well for the month of July and maybe early August to bring some much needed precipitation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely the area. You look at the drought maps, and even over a week, not much has changed down there. But with that weather, with that moisture, should start to see that unpack a little bit. Let's real quick kind of focus on that maybe northern Corn Belt area. It had been a little bit dry. Are they going to get any of this that kind of moves up into there? I think I'm kind of going to throw a little bit into their Nebraska a bit too, because even though I know they're not in the northern Corn Belt, but that's been an area that keeps popping up as being dry.
Yeah, we just brought up Grand Island. This recent spell of this monsoonal moisture has brought some very beneficial rains to Nebraska. Of course, you don't want 7 to 10 inches to happen all at once.
Yeah.
But a lot of Nebraska and a lot of Iowa, southern Minnesota, and southern Wisconsin have benefited from the subtropical flow of moisture over the last couple of weeks. And I think they're going to continue to see that. So the Northwest Corn Belt, the prospects for precipitation have really gotten a lot better since we've seen this pattern evolve. And, if you kind of look at the big picture, We've had this heat wave recently in the central eastern United States that grabbed a lot of headlines. But at the same time, there's been this heat wave. It's been unseasonably cool in the West. I mean, it wasn't long ago we had it snow in Yellowstone, Glacier, and Grand Teton National Parks. And when you have a big contrast west to east across the nation like that, there's usually going to be a zone in between that gets really wet. And that is certainly that Northwest Corn Belt arching southwestward back into New Mexico, the western areas of Texas where the heavier rains have been. So it's been a pattern that, yes, has caused extreme heat and extreme coolness, but it's those kind of contrasting weather events that can really help break a dry spell. And we're seeing that really from Nebraska and Iowa all the way back into the southern Rockies.
Mm-hmm. So as we're approaching the 4th of July weekend and the first part of July, you've already talked about that earlier monsoon moisture going to start to move up. Anything else as we look ahead into July for the next couple of weeks out?
Well, I do think the heat wave in the central and east United States will throttle back a little bit. It's still going to be hot and muggy, but not as extreme. And I also think that the far western part of the United States, from the Pacific Northwest to California, they're going to have a 4th of July week that is going to be a little cool, a little bit cooler than average. So you're not hearing about extreme heat in California because they haven't had it yet, and they're not going to for a little bit longer.
Okay. All right. Well, Don, appreciate the update and look forward to talking to you next week.
Sounds good.
And if you'd like to tune in each and every morning and follow along with meteorologist Don Day on this weather that's going to be happening across the summer, you can go to his website at dayweather.com. There's a link to his YouTube channel for his daily video podcast. Earlier in the program, Ted Perry was talking about water quality. Well, before you have water quality, you need to know the status of your water situation on your ranch. And for several years, we have now been using Tank Toad, a remote water monitoring system, all from the convenience of my phone, where I can keep an eye on my water supply, whether it's a cistern tank, whether it's a well, whether it's a stock tank, a lot of different applications and ways that can be used. If you want to find out more, go to their website at tanktoad.com, or you can give them a call at 801-252-6130. 35. Tune in next week. Amanda Radke joining us, podcaster, fifth-generation cattle rancher, author, educator, speaker, joining us as we talk about the subject, the importance of the security and the safety of a country that can produce its own food and fiber. You won't want to miss it. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.